Calabasas, California, January 26, 2020, 9:06 in the morning. The fog that morning was the kind that doesn't just settle over a landscape, it swallows it. Thick, low, and absolute, it had rolled an overnight across the hills of Los Angeles County and refused to lift with the dawn. Visibility in the Calabasas area was measured in hundreds of feet, not miles. The Santa Monica Mountains, which on clear days frame the northern edge of the Los Angeles basin with the kind of dramatic beauty that makes people understand immediately why the city exists where it does, had disappeared entirely behind a wall of gray that offered no definition, no depth, no way to tell where the air ended and the rock began. At John Wayne Airport in Orange County, 40 miles to the south, where the fog was lighter and the morning felt almost ordinary, a Sikorsky S-76B helicopter with a tail number N72EX was warming its engines on the tarmac. The aircraft was a luxury charter, cream interior, two powerful Pratt and Whitney turboshaft engines, the kind of machine that transforms a 90-mile journey across the Los Angeles sprawl from a 2-hour ordeal on congested freeways into a 20-minute glide above the traffic. It was a Sunday morning. The freeways would have been lighter than usual. The helicopter was still the faster choice. It was always the faster choice. 9 people climbed aboard. Among them was a 13-year-old girl wearing a purple uniform. She was heading to a basketball game at her father's sports academy in Thousand Oaks. She had her father's intensity and her father's love of the game, and by every account of everyone who had watched her play, her father's talent in concentrated and frightening form. Her name was Gianna Bryant. Her teammates called her Gigi. Her father called her Mambacita. Her father was Kobe Bryant. He was 41 years old, 5 NBA championships, 18 All-Star appearances, 81 points in a single game, 20 years in a Lakers uniform, the most recognizable basketball player on earth for the better part of 2 decades, and in retirement, something that some people who had known only the competitor found even more compelling. A man who was becoming, with visible intention and genuine effort, the person he had always wanted to be underneath the armor of championship ambition. He was going to coach his daughter's basketball game that Sunday morning. That was the whole plan. Coach the game, fly home, be back in time for dinner. At 9:06 a.m., the helicopter lifted off the tarmac and banked northwest toward the hills. 46 minutes later, it was gone, and the world, the whole world, all at once, in a moment of collective shock that happens only a handful of times in any generation, stopped. Subscribe to this channel right now, before we go any further, because this is not just a story of a helicopter crash. It is the story of a man who was in the middle of becoming something even greater than what he already was, and the story of what the world lost when the fog swallowed those hills on a Sunday morning in January. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, August 23, 1978. Kobe Bean Bryant arrived in the world with a name taken from a menu. His parents, Joe and Pamela Bryant, had been browsing a restaurant menu in a steakhouse in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and spotted Kobe beef, the Japanese delicacy, expensive and rare, listed among the entrees. They liked the sound of it. They gave it to their son. His middle name, Bean, was a nod to his father's nickname. Joe Jellybean Bryant, a flamboyant, gifted forward who had played 8 seasons in the NBA before taking his talents and his family overseas to continue his professional career in Italy. Kobe was 6 years old when the family moved to Rieti in central Italy, then to Pistoia, then to Reggio Calabria. He grew up speaking Italian, playing soccer in the streets, watching Italian football on television with the passionate intensity of a child who absorbs whatever the world around him offers with complete openness. He also kept playing basketball because basketball was what his father did and what his father loved, and in the way that children of athletes always are, Kobe was soaking the game not as a hobby but as an inheritance. He was a different kind of kid from the beginning. The stories from those years in Italy, told by teammates of his father, by schoolmates, by people who remember thin American boys shooting free throws alone in the gymnasium long after everyone else had gone home, have the quality of origin myths precisely because what came later gave them that shape. But the behavior they described was real. A child who practiced with an obsessiveness that made adults uncomfortable, who didn't play basketball for fun in a way that other children play basketball for fun, but who played it with focused, almost frightening seriousness that suggested he understood, even at 10 years old, that what he was doing was not practice for the game, but practice for his life. When the family returned to the United States in 1991, Kobe was 13. They settled in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and he enrolled at Lower Merion High School in the township of the same name. He arrived as an outsider, an American kid who was more comfortable in Italian, who had grown up in a different country, who carried himself with a quality of self-containment that some of his new classmates read as arrogance and others read as mystery. He broke the all-time scoring record for Southeastern Pennsylvania high school basketball. The record he broke had been held by Wilt Chamberlain. He was 17 years old when he did it. Duke wanted him. North Carolina wanted him. Michigan wanted him. The greatest college basketball programs in the country were offering him scholarships with the eagerness of institutions that understand exactly what they're looking at when they see it. He turned them all down. He would go to the NBA directly from high school, an almost unheard-of path for a guard at the time, a decision that his family publicly supported and that private observers privately questioned. The Charlotte Hornets selected him with the 13th overall pick in the 1996 NBA draft. Immediately, he was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers. Kobe Bryant was 17 years old. He had never played a professional basketball game, and he was about to become, over the next 20 years, one of the most consequential figures in the history of American sports. The career of Kobe Bryant defies clean summarization because it contains contradictions that most careers are too short or too narrow to hold. There was the prodigy, the teenager who won the slam dunk contest in his first All-Star weekend, who became the youngest All-Star in NBA history at 19, who announced himself to the league with a combination of physical gifts and psychological ferocity that made even veteran players stop and recalibrate their understanding of what a basketball player could be. There was a champion, the man who won 3 consecutive NBA championships from 2000 to 2002 alongside Shaquille O'Neal, forming one of the most dominant partnerships in the history of the sport. 2 enormous personalities in constant creative tension with each other, producing on the court something that neither could have produced alone. Then 2 more championships in 2009 and 2010, after the partnership had dissolved and Kobe had become the unquestioned center of gravity of his team and his franchise, proving that the first 3 had not been borrowed from Shaq's shadow. There was a scorer, the man who on January 22nd, 2006, against the Toronto Raptors at the Staples Center, scored 81 points in a single game. 81 points. In the history of the NBA, only Wilt Chamberlain had ever scored more in a game, and Chamberlain had done it in an era of such different defensive standards that direct comparison is nearly impossible. What Kobe did that night against Toronto was so statistically improbable that the people watching it in the arena didn't quite believe it was happening in real time. The number is still, nearly 2 decades later, something that stops the conversation when it enters the room. And there was the darkness. In the summer of 2003, Kobe Bryant was accused of sexual assault by a 19-year-old hotel employee in Eagle County, Colorado. Criminal charges were filed. He denied the assault, maintaining that the encounter was consensual. The case became one of the most closely followed criminal proceedings in the country, dissected across every media platform, generating coverage that was by turns sensational and genuinely troubling in its treatment of the woman who made the accusation. The criminal case was dropped in September 2004 after the accuser chose not to testify. Bryant issued a public statement that acknowledged the sexual encounter while maintaining it was consensual and expressed regret for the pain caused. A civil lawsuit was settled out of court on undisclosed terms. The case never went away entirely. It existed for the rest of his life and after his death as a shadow that complicated the narrative of his legacy in ways that some people felt were insufficient and others felt were excessive. The question of how to hold the full truth of Kobe Bryant, the extraordinary athlete, the devoted father, the man accused of serious crime, the man who spent the second half of his life trying to become something more than any of those individual descriptions, is a question that the world is still genuinely working through. What is beyond dispute is that after 2004, something shifted in Bryant. Whether it was a crisis of the legal case or the dissolution of the O'Neal partnership or the natural maturation of someone who had spent his entire adult life achieving things at maximum velocity and had begun to understand that velocity alone was not sufficient, something changed. He became, by the account of people who knew him in both eras, more deliberate, more interested in other people's stories, more willing to acknowledge complexity, including his own. He also became a better basketball player, which seemed impossible but was true. Drop a like on this video if the full complexity of Kobe Bryant's story is exactly why it matters to tell it honestly, because the people worth understanding are never the simple ones. He was known, in the language of the sport, as the Black Mamba. The name came from a movie Kill Bill, from the deadly African snake that strikes without warning and with complete commitment. Kobe adopted it as his alter ego in the difficult years after 2003, a way of separating the emotional complexity of his private life from the competitive machine he became when he crossed the sideline. The Black Mamba didn't have doubts, didn't have vulnerabilities, didn't have anything except the absolute commitment to winning the moment in front of him. He described the Mamba mentality in terms that became, eventually, a kind of philosophy that extended far beyond basketball. The idea that excellence was not a talent, but a practice. That the gap between where you were and where you want to be was measured not in gifts, but in hours, in repetitions, in the willingness to be in the gym at 4 a.m. when everyone else was sleeping, not because someone told you to be there, but because the work itself was the point. The process was a prize. He woke up at 3:30 a.m. to train, not occasionally, every day. He studied his opponents with the methodical obsession of a researcher, watching film until he could predict, before the game began, how a defender would move in a situation they hadn't encountered yet. He practiced shots from angles that other players didn't practice, because those angles only present themselves once or twice in a game, once or twice per game, across an 82-game season, across 20 seasons. The math of obsessive preparation. The other players who played alongside him or against him during those years speak of the Mamba mentality with consistency that suggests they are describing something real and not simply polishing a legend. LeBron James has spoken of it. Michael Jordan, who knew something about competitive obsession himself, has spoken of it. Younger players who came up in the years after Kobe's retirement speak of it as a standard against which they measure their own commitment to their craft. He retired on April 13th, 2016, and the retirement, like everything Kobe Bryant did, was theatrical in the best possible sense of the word. He scored 60 points in his final game. 60 points. At age 37, with a body that had been through multiple serious injuries, including a torn Achilles tendon, after playing barely over 30 minutes of a game against the Utah Jazz. He scored 60 points and then stood at center court of the Staples Center, the building where he had played his entire career, where both of his jersey numbers would later be retired and hang from the rafters, and said to the crowd, in the direct, unguarded way that he had learned finally to speak, "What can I say? Mamba out." The crowd's response was the sound of 20,000 people trying to process something they didn't have adequate emotional equipment for. The end of 20 years. The end of a version of the Staples Center that had existed since 1999. The end of something they had taken for granted the way people take for granted anything that has been reliably, magnificently present for their entire adult lives. He walked off the court and into a retirement that turned out to be, for everyone who followed it, something genuinely surprising. Because Kobe Bryant in retirement was not Kobe Bryant on pause. He was Kobe Bryant in a second life that had a different center of gravity. The center was his family. And the center of his family, increasingly, was Gianna. He had 4 daughters with Vanessa, whom he had met when she was 17 and he was 21, and whom he married in April 2001 in a ceremony that was the kind of personal decision that generates strong opinions from people with no stake in the outcome. They had Natalia, born in 2003, Gianna, born in 2006, Bianca, born in 2016, and Capri, born in June 2019, just 7 months before the crash. 4 daughters. And Kobe Bryant, who had spent 20 years as the most intensely competitive human being in any room he entered, was in the happiest season of his life being their father. The particular story he told about Gianna, the one he told publicly in interviews at events with the specific warmth of someone recounting something that had genuinely delighted him, was about the moment he realized she was serious about basketball. Not the way a child is serious about something their parent loves because they love their parent. Actually serious. The kind of serious that comes from inside. He had taken her to Lakers games during his playing career. She would sit courtside and study the game with an attention that went beyond childhood enthusiasm. She asked questions that were not the questions of a fan, but the questions of a student. She wanted to know why a play worked, not just that it worked. She wanted to understand the geometry of spacing, the timing of cuts, the decision-making process of a point guard running a half-court offense. After his retirement, he began coaching her team at the Mamba Sports Academy, the youth athletic program he had created in Thousand Oaks with the explicit intention of developing young athletes who didn't have access to elite training. He coached Gianna's team. He watched other games. He talked about basketball with his daughter the way he had spent 20 years talking about basketball with coaches and assistants and film study partners, with total engagement, complete seriousness, and the pleasure of someone who loves the thing they're doing not as performance but as an authentic expression of who they are. People who were at Mamba Academy practices during those years have said in interviews that watching Kobe coach Gianna was one of the most affecting things they had ever witnessed in proximity to professional sport. The competitor who had been merciless with his own teammates, who had an earned reputation for demanding perfection and making clear his displeasure when he didn't receive it, was patient with his daughter's team in a way that required real work. You could see him working at the patience, and you could see underneath it the genuine joy. Gianna was good, not Kobe's daughter good, a category that exists only in the minds of people who haven't seen her play. Actually good. Coaches and scouts who watched her at the academy describe her footwork, her basketball IQ, her ability to read the defense before making a move, with the careful language of people who understand that hyperbole is cheap, but accurate observation is rare and valuable. She wanted to play at UConn, Gino Orima's program, the standard for women's college basketball. She wanted to play in the WNBA. She was going to take the family legacy to a whole different level. Kobe said in an interview that circulated widely after his death, in which he described a conversation they had about people who would say to him, "It's too bad you didn't have a son." He would look at Gianna, he said, and she would look back at him, and then she would say, "I got this, Daddy." And she'd talk about how she was going to make the Mamba legacy continue. He believed her completely. Everyone who saw her play believed her. Kamena Bakso Agora, tell me in the comments, where were you when you first heard the news on the morning of January 26th? Because I want to know how far the shockwave of that morning reached. And while you're thinking about that, let's go back to what happened. The flight path of N-72EX, the Sikorsky S-76B helicopter that departed John Wayne Airport at 9:06 a.m. on January 26, 2020, was not complicated. 90 miles roughly northwest, over the flat land of Orange County, across the Los Angeles Basin, through the San Fernando Valley, over the Santa Monica Mountains, and down into Thousand Oaks in Ventura County, where the Mamba Sports Academy waited with a basketball tournament and a gym full of girls who played on Gianna Bryant's team. The pilot was Bryant. He was 50 years old, a veteran aviator with thousands of flight hours, a certified flight instructor, someone who knew the Los Angeles helicopter corridors as well as any pilot operating in the region. He had flown Kobe Bryant many times before. The two had developed a friendship of the kind that forms between a frequent flyer and a trusted pilot, a relationship built on the specific intimacy of being responsible for someone's safety on a regular basis, and the gratitude that builds on the other side of that responsibility. The NTSB investigation would later find, in its careful and unsparing documentation of what went wrong, that this friendship may have been part of what went wrong, that Zobayan had developed a friendship with Bryant that may have led to his self-induced pressure to please his high-profile client, that the decision to continue flying into deteriorating conditions, the decision that would prove fatal, was shaped not only by the mechanical realities of the flight, but by the human reality of not wanting to disappoint the man in the back. But that finding came later. On the morning of January 26, what was happening in real time was this. At 9:20 a.m., the helicopter passed over Dodger Stadium. Zobayan was in contact with Burbank Air Traffic Control. The controllers asked him to circle over Glendale, waiting for clearance through the airspace. He circled. At 9:35 a.m., clearance came, and N-72EX continued northwest toward Calabasas. By this point, the fog in the hills ahead was significantly worse than it had been when they departed. The mountains that the helicopter needed to cross, Not dramatically high, but high enough and steep enough, and without landmarks when visibility is measured in feet, were completely invisible beneath the overcast. Zobayan requested what is called special VFR clearance from air traffic control, permission to fly visually in conditions that technically require instrument flight rules, because his helicopter was certified only for visual flight rules. He got the clearance, and he continued. At 9:44 a.m., the helicopter was below the cloud layer, flying through canyon terrain of the Calabasas Hills at approximately 1,600 feet altitude. It was moving at roughly 150 miles per hour. The hills around it were rising. The cloud layer above was descending. The space in which Zobayan could safely operate, the margin between the terrain below and the overcast above, was narrowing with every second. At 9:44 and 40 seconds a.m., flight data shows the helicopter beginning a sharp left banking turn, descending rapidly. At 9:45 and 15 seconds a.m., N-72EX impacted a hillside at an elevation of approximately 1,385 feet on a hillside in the Las Virgenes Canyon area of Calabasas. The impact speed was consistent with the aircraft being in a near vertical descent. The debris field covered more than 500 feet. All 9 people aboard were killed instantly. Kobe Bryant, Gianna Bryant, John Altobelli, the head baseball coach at Orange Coast College in Costa Mesa, his wife, Carrie Altobelli, their 13-year-old daughter, Alyssa, who played on Gianna's team at the Mamba Academy, Peyton Chester, 13, also a teammate of Gianna's, her mother, Sarah Chester, Christina Mauser, 38, an assistant basketball coach at the academy, and Zobayan, the pilot who had flown Kobe too many times to count, who had become his friend, and who in the final minutes of his life was trying to find a way through the fog that wasn't there. The news reached the world in a way that news no longer usually reaches the world, not gradually, not through the traditional architecture of journalism breaking a story in careful sequence, but in a sudden explosion across social media that had the quality of a detonation. A tweet here, a post there, then the dam breaking all at once. At Staples Center, where workers were setting up for the NBA All-Star Celebrity Game scheduled for that evening. People heard and stopped moving. Some sat down on the floor of the arena. Some wept. The game was eventually postponed. At NBA arenas across the country, players who heard the news during pre-game warm-ups could not play. James Harden broke down in the hallway. LeBron James, who had just passed Kobe on the all-time NBA scoring list 2 days earlier and had texted with him that night. LeBron, who knew Kobe in a way that only another great player can know another great player, in the specific language of shared obsession and mutual respect that exists between people at the very top of a demanding thing, was photographed on the tarmac of an airport, covering his face with his hands, the news having reached him before he boarded his flight. The Los Angeles Lakers postponed their next 2 games. The city of Los Angeles went quiet in a way that cities go quiet only when they have lost something that was genuinely, essentially theirs. Murals appeared on walls within hours. Flowers and candles and jerseys accumulated outside the Staples Center through the afternoon and into the night, in the rain that began falling over Los Angeles on the evening of January 26th, as if the city itself had decided to do the appropriate thing. Around the world, monuments and landmarks were lit in Laker gold and purple. In Manila, in Tokyo, in London, in Lagos, in Beijing, in Sao Paulo, in every city where basketball was played and loved, and where Kobe Bryant's name meant something, people gathered in public places to sit with the lost together. Because this is what happens when someone who is genuinely universal is suddenly, without warning, gone. The grief becomes communal in a way that overrides the boundaries of nationality and language and culture that normally keep people's sorrows separate. The Grammys were held that night in Los Angeles. Alicia Keys opened the ceremony by acknowledging what had happened, and the arena, the Staples Center, the building where Kobe Bryant had spent 20 years, where his jerseys hung from the rafters, sat with the weight of it in a silence that was not performative but real. Vanessa Bryant was at home with her 3 surviving daughters, Natalia, 17, Bianca, 3, and Capri, just 7 months old. A family assistant came to her door around 11:30 that morning. He told her that Kobe and Gianna had been involved in a helicopter accident, but that early reports indicated 5 people had survived. Vanessa thought, in that brief mercy of early information, that her husband and daughter were among the survivors. She tried to call Kobe. He did not answer. And then the notifications began arriving on her phone, and the mercy ended. My brain refuses to accept that both Kobe and Gigi are gone, she wrote on Instagram in the days that followed. It's like I'm trying to process Kobe being gone, but my body refuses to accept my Gigi will never come back to me. It feels wrong. Why should I be able to wake up another day when my baby girl isn't being able to have that opportunity? I'm so mad. She had so much life to live. She added, I'm not sure what our lives hold beyond today, and it's impossible to imagine life without them. But we wake up each day, try and keep pushing because Kobe and our baby girl, Gigi, are shining on us to light the way. The NTSB investigation into the crash of N-72EX was thorough, professional, and in a tradition of the agency that exists specifically to learn from catastrophic failures, honest about what it found. The probable cause, adopted unanimously by the board on February 9th, 2021, was a pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions, leading to spatial disorientation and loss of control of the aircraft. Spatial disorientation, the clinical term for something that is, in its lived experience, one of the most terrifying things that can happen to a human being in flight. It occurs when the vestibular system, the inner ear, the body's primary tool for determining its own orientation in space, receives information that contradicts what the instruments are showing. When you can't see the horizon, can't see the ground, can't see anything outside the aircraft that tells your body which way is up, your inner ear begins generating its own version of reality, and the version it generates is wrong. The body insists you are flying level when you are banking steeply. It insists you are climbing when you are descending. And if a pilot trusts their body over their instruments, a deeply instinctive, almost irresistible impulse, the result is exactly what happened in the hills of Calabasas. The investigation found that Bryant, as the helicopter entered the dense overcast at low altitude over rising terrain, began a sharp left banking turn. The flight data recorder showed that the aircraft descent rate in the final seconds was increasing rapidly. He reported to air traffic control in his last transmission that he was climbing to 4,000 feet. Flight data indicates the helicopter was descending. He did not know which way was up, and the hills were right there in the white fog, invisible and immediate. The investigation also noted, with the precision of a document that must speak difficult truths carefully, that there had been opportunities along the way to have reversed the course and prevented this crash by simply landing. The NTSB chairman, Robert Sumwalt, said this directly at the press conference announcing the findings. The morning had provided chances to turn back, to land, to wait for conditions to improve. Bryant had not taken them. Why? The investigation pointed to what it called plan continuation bias, the cognitive tendency to continue toward a goal even when conditions that originally made that goal achievable have changed. Combined with what investigators described as a self-induced pressure to please his high-profile client, the pilot had made a series of decisions, each of which seemed marginally reasonable in isolation, and which together constituted a fatal trajectory. The helicopter had no terrain awareness and warning system, a technology that would alert pilots when they are dangerously close to the ground. The NTSB noted this absence, and also noted that his analysis suggested the system would not have prevented this specific crash because the conditions that produced the crash were primarily the result of spatial disorientation occurring too close to the terrain for any warning to have made a difference. The families of the victims filed lawsuits against the operator of the helicopter and against other parties. In 2021, a lawsuit brought by Vanessa Bryant against Los Angeles County, arising from the conduct of sheriff's deputies who shared photographs of the crash site with unauthorized persons, a secondary violation that added to the wound, was resolved in her favor. A federal jury awarded her over $16 million in damages. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that the only way to honor someone's life is to understand it completely, not just the victories, not just the records, but the full, complicated, irreplaceable human being, because that's what Kobe Bryant was. Not a symbol, not an abstraction, a human being, with a full range of dimensions that phrase contains, who was 41 years old on the morning he climbed into that helicopter with his daughter and flew into the fog. The memorial service for Kobe and Gianna Bryant was held on February 24th, 2020, at the Staples Center. The date, February 24th, was chosen deliberately. Gianna's jersey number was 2. Kobe's most famous number was 24. 20,000 people filled the arena. Millions more watched on live television. Beyoncé opened the ceremony, performing EXO and Halo in front of a full orchestral arrangement, her voice moving through the arena with quality of something both enormous and intimate. The arena that had roared for Kobe Bryant through 20 years of playoff games and championship runs was absolutely still in a way it had never been when he was playing in it. Vanessa Bryant spoke last. She stood at the podium in black, her daughters beside her, and she described the man she had married when she was 17, and he was 21, the man who had grown into someone she was still discovering. She described Gianna with the specificity of a mother who has memorized every detail of her child. The smile, the humor, the seriousness about the game, the love she had for her family, the person she was becoming at 13. She said, God knew they couldn't be on this earth without each other. He had to bring them home to have them together. And she said, Babe, you take care of our Gigi. In the front rows of the Staples Center, professional basketball players who had competed against Kobe Bryant, who had been intimidated by him and inspired by him, and occasionally infuriated by him, sat with tears running down their faces without attempting to stop them. Because what Vanessa Bryant was describing, the specific texture of loving someone whose intensity was simultaneously his greatest gift and his greatest challenge, and losing that person when the story was still going, was something that required no translation, no shared context, no particular knowledge of basketball. It just required being human. Gino Orima, the coach of the UConn women's basketball program where Gianna had dreamed of playing, spoke about a visit she had made to campus. He described her watching practice with the focused attention of someone who was calculating, not watching. He made a gentle joke about a moment when she had passed up an open shot in a drill, something her father would never have done, and said, I thought she's not listening to her father. The arena laughed through the grief. It was the right kind of laugh, the kind that is also a form of love. The bronze statue of Kobe and Gianna that Vanessa Bryant unveiled on what would have been his 43rd birthday sits at the Staples Center, now the Crypto.com Arena. It shows him kneeling, coaching his daughter, her leaning toward him the posture of a child who is listening and already starting to move before the instruction is finished. It captures something that the championship trophies and the scoring records and the all-star selections can't quite capture, the version of Kobe Bryant that the last years of his life were producing. The father, the coach, the man who had found, in the second act of his life, that the thing he most wanted to build was not a dynasty, but a person, Gianna Bryant, who at 13 had already developed the kind of game that serious observers describe with a specific, careful vocabulary they reserve for players who are genuinely exceptional, who had her father's footwork and her father's intensity, and, according to everyone who watched her play, a basketball IQ that seemed to exceed what 13 years of living could reasonably have produced, who wanted to play at UConn and then in the WNBA, who had told her father, when someone asked him if he wished he had a son to carry on the basketball legacy, I got this, Daddy. She got it. The tragedy is that the world never got to see how much she had. The Mamba and Mambacita Sports Foundation, renamed by Vanessa after the crash to include both of their signatures, continues to fund athletic programs for youth in underserved communities. The work that Kobe built, which he built because he believed that the gift of the game should not be rationed by zip code or economic circumstance, continues in both their names. The hills of Calabasas where N72EX came down look, on a clear day, like what they are, beautiful terrain, green and rolling, with a particular quality of California winter light that makes everything seem almost luminous. A small memorial stands near the crash site. People come to leave flowers and jerseys, and handwritten notes and photographs. They come from Los Angeles and from other states and from other countries, because the person who died on that hillside was not just a local loss. He was 41 years old. In the full, complicated, absolutely human arc of his life, he had been extraordinary and troubled and determined and devoted, and in his retirement, in the years of coaching his daughter and telling anyone who would listen about the Mamba mentality and what it meant when you extracted it from basketball and applied it to the project of becoming who you wanted to be, he was becoming something that felt To the people who watched it happen, like the truest version of himself, he had scored 60 points in his last game. He had held his daughter's hand in a helicopter on a foggy Sunday morning. He had been on his way to coach her basketball team. He never got there. The fog didn't lift. The hills didn't move. And a pilot who was trying to do right by his client made a series of decisions that the instruments and the terrain and the physics of the moment could not accommodate. 9 people went up into the gray morning. None of them came back down. And the world, which had watched Kobe Bryant through 20 years of fourth quarters and championship celebrations and comeback moments and the long, hard education of becoming someone better than you started out, went quiet in the way that it goes quiet only when it has lost something it didn't know was finite until the moment it was gone. Vanessa Bryant wrote in one of her earliest public statements after crash, "I know what I'm feeling is normal. It's part of the grieving process. I just wanted to share in case there's anyone out there that's experienced a loss like this. In case there's anyone out there that's experienced a loss like this." In those words, in that instinct to reach outward even from the center of personal devastation, to imagine that someone else might be helped by hearing the truth of what she was feeling. There's something that sounds exactly like what everyone who knew Kobe Bryant in his last years described as a change that had happened in him. The turning outward. The recognition that whatever you were doing it in relationship to other people, and that the quality of those relationships was the real measure thing. He built the Mamba Sports Academy because young athletes needed somewhere to go. He coached his daughter's basketball team on Sunday mornings because that was where she needed him to be. He climbed into a helicopter on a foggy morning in January because a game was scheduled and the girls who played with Gianna were expecting their coach. He was always going towards something, always in motion, always with a destination. The fog took the destination from him, and from Gianna, and from 7 other people whose lives and families and futures were complete and irreplaceable and not footnotes to anyone else's story. What remains is everything they left, in the people they loved, in the games Kobe played, in the foundation that carries both their names, in the girls who learned to play basketball, because a man who had won 5 championships decided that coaching his daughter's team was the most important thing he could do on a Sunday morning. And what remains is the question that every great life eventually poses to the people who loved it and watched it. Not what was lost, but what was built. Not what the fog swallowed, but what it couldn't reach. The records, the championships, the 60-point finale, the 81-point night. The philosophy that a generation of athletes took and made their own. The Mamba mentality, which was never really about basketball at all, but about the belief that whatever you were doing deserved your complete attention, your maximum effort, your willingness to be in the gym at 4 a.m. not because someone told you to be there, but because that is what love looks like when it is translated into action. Kobe Bryant was 41 years old. He had a 7-month-old daughter at home. He had a 13-year-old who was going to take the family legacy somewhere he couldn't fully predict yet, but believed in completely. He had so much left to do. And in the hills of Calabasas, on a Sunday morning in January, the fog had other plans. Mambo out.